Welcome everybody. I just want to make a few announcements before we start. There's some of these events that are going to be happening fairly soon. The 31st, that is tomorrow, we have a workshop titled History Through Photographs, Exploring the Visual Landscape of the Northeast of India. And this is in association with Dr. Joy L.K. Pachau at JNU and Professor Willem van Schendel at the University of Amsterdam. And subsequently, we have a public lecture at 3 p.m. On the 31st by Professor Nivedita Menon and from JNU, and the title of the talk is The University, Transformations in the Work of Intellect. On the 1st of November, we have the workshop, which was the History Through Photographs, Exploring the Visual Landscape of Northeast India. That continues through the 1st of November, which is on Friday, and it commences at 9 a.m. And also at 5 p.m. on the 1st of November, we have a public lecture in the Rethinking History series by Professor Rustam Barucha from JNU, and the title of the talk is Between History and Performance, Reflections on the Limits of Disciplines. And also, we're to just briefly mention that there's these new sort of published occasional papers that have just come out, and I'd encourage you to read them and purchase them if you're interested. The first is Life, Literature and Folk Deities in the Mangroves by Shuttapat Chatterjee Sarkar, and the other one is The Islamic Terrorists in Popular Hindi Cinema, Crisis of Perspective in Qurban and New York by Roshni Sengupta. So I think it's a pleasure to have Dr. Aparajita Datta here today. I'm just going to briefly introduce her work, so bear with me. So Dr. Aparajita Datta's 17-year professional experience has included wildlife surveys, research projects, and setting up community-based conservation programs. Dr. Datta also has an interest in understanding the ethics, socioeconomics, and politics behind dominant conservation paradigms and the human dimensions of conservation issues and policies in India. She set up the research and community-based conservation programs in the Eastern Himalaya program of NCF from 2003. Dr. Datta has also set up community-based conservation programs in Arunachal Pradesh, and apart from research on anthropogenic drivers of wildlife decline, hornbill sociology, seed dispersal, hornbill biology, I'm so sorry. Hornbill biology, seed dispersal, tree is it phenology or phenology? I'm sorry, it's phenology, sorry. Tree phenology and population monitoring of key faunal groups. She has undertaken surveys, expeditions into Arunachal's forests, and I think I'll keep it brief. And she's also published 3 books for children, so I think that might be something that interests you. So I think without further delay.
Yeah. When Mahesh invited me almost a year ago to give this lecture, I was very honored, but he needed a title for the talk very quickly, and I sent him one in a big hurry, and now I find it daunting that I sent such a big title, which presumes that I have the knowledge to talk about such very, very big and often contentious issues related to Northeast India. My own first-hand work experience has been limited largely to Arunachal Pradesh, where I first landed up there as a wildlife researcher in '95, and I've been working there since. And although I'm a wildlife biologist, today I'll not talk so much about wildlife. I'll actually talk about people and the challenges to conservation in the northeastern region. Why is it not going? Yeah, okay. As all of you know, the northeastern region comprises of 8 states of, I don't want to give it, Arunachal in the north, and Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram, Tripura, Meghalaya, Assam, and Sikkim right there. And it is often not apparent to people in mainland India, but it is a very diverse region with different cultures and histories of people. It's very heterogeneous, actually. And it is also famed for its biological diversity. Oops, yeah, sorry. I'm not used to sitting and talking. So, and like in most of the other states of Northeast India, Arunachal Pradesh is one of the states which has a very high diversity of different tribal communities, 26 tribes and 110 sub-tribes, similarly in many of the other states. While the other thing is that, Arunachal, Mizoram, Nagaland, where the population is largely 60 to 90% is tribal population, whereas in states like Assam and Sikkim and Tripura, 20 to 30% of the people are tribal. But, sorry, I keep forgetting, one of the first things that strikes me about Northeast India is that it is a region of paradoxes. Often the image that is portrayed of Northeast India is one of a strife-ridden place. There's conflict and violence. And for people in mainland India, that's how usually people perceive the place. And, the army is a visible presence in Northeast India with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act in force in some states. And there are a multitude of conflicts and groups fighting for different, there's different demands for statehood, for self-determination, for rights, for secession. And this continuing violence has resulted in a lot of human casualties, and there are many dimensions to this problem. So, for instance, Bodoland is one of the, Bodos are fighting for Bodoland, and their demand is for the they want statehood for a large part of the northern part of the Brahmaputra, the north bank of the Brahmaputra, which are in the foothill areas of Assam and Arunachal. And their demand for the state is actually for an area of some 27,000 square kilometers, which is 35% of Assam. Similarly, there are other groups which demand other areas which are, and many of these areas are overlapping, right? So for Nagaland, for instance, Nagaland people want areas which now form parts of Assam, Manipur, Arunachal. The point here that I'm making is that, and then there's Koch Rajbangshis, there's Karvis, there's Dimasas, there's many different groups with different kinds of problems and histories and demands. And, so there are multiple reasons for the conflict, but as a result of this conflict, one of the reasons for the conflict is that it is all rooted in the control for a lot of land and resources, which has obvious implications for conservation. And I will elaborate on this later in the talk. So, the perception, of this, of course, is strengthened by the incidence of violence that is often reported from the Northeast, of killings and burns, and this has obvious repercussions on people's lives and development in the region. However, for me, these realities are kind of at odds with the sense of peace and well-being and, the whole, the way life is lived there, and in a very laid-back way, in a slow pace, and with a lot of humor and courtesy. And, of course, this may be a kind of although I am not a tribal, but it may be a figment of my own biased imagination and sensibilities where, I feel at peace and at home over there. So for me, it's not a place of violence only. So that's the paradox for me. And as a woman working in remote rural areas and forests, this violent region is where I feel safe. I'm really sorry, I think I forgot to switch off my own phone. Yeah. I mean, this is a place where a woman can hitch rides on passing trucks and walk around alone at 3 a.m. in the middle of a curfew. And it's not that I've not had the moments of danger, but as a consequence of the backdrop of violence, but it has not overshadowed the sense of peace that I feel there. And for the people of the Northeast, it is part of their daily life and living, and life goes on despite all the strife and conflict. So my next question is another paradox, that of the portrayal of the area as a backward and poorly developed area. And, it might seem a somewhat silly question to some of you, but I think that the Northeast can teach us a lot. First is, of course, the fact that, even though the area is poorly developed economically, in terms of many human social parameters, the Northeast fares much better than other states in the country. For instance, literacy in the Northeast is very high right now. It's 79%, and more importantly, the gender gap in literacy is less than 9%. And in fact, for states like Nagaland and Mysore, it's almost negligible, which is not the case when you look at the rest of India. And, literacy has also improved tremendously in the last decade. And, of course, there's wide variation. A state like Arunachal has only 67% literacy, while states like Mizoram is on par with Kerala. In fact, 2 of the districts have the highest literacy levels in the country, in Mizoram. The other issue is sex ratios in the northeastern states are much higher, both for children and as well as for adults. And however, there are reasons for worry, because that is also declining in most northeastern states. Now, the other issue is, of course, that relatively much lower human population density, but of course that is very widely variable, with states like Arunachal and Mizoram relatively low versus Assam and Tripura, which are almost as high as the rest of India. And Nagaland has, of course, registered this very strange demographic kind of somersault. I don't know if you know, but in 2001, the demography or the report was that 64% growth rate. Okay, whereas now in 2011 it's negative, it's minus 0.5, and that is probably due to some discrepancy in the way the census is conducted there. But basically, although the decadal growth rate in most northeastern states are higher than the national average, it's declining from earlier. And okay. Now I come to more of my subject area, and one is what is the state of forest cover in Northeast India? And we have the Forest Survey of India, which maps the extent of forest cover in India, and it suggests that in 2011 their report suggests that the 8 northeastern states, which constitutes about 8% of the area, together makes up a fourth of the country's forest cover. And according to FSI, the region still harbors 66% of forest cover. Now, but if we, so this is what it looks like in most of Northeast India. Now, I don't know why it's showing these question marks anyway in the graph, but so this is supposed to be the forest cover as per the report in 2011, and very dense, by the way, is a classification which is referring to greater than 70% of tree canopy cover, whereas moderately dense is 40 to 70, and open is between 10 to 40%. Now, if you look at this, one thing to notice here is that most of this so-called 66% is also largely open forest, which is not really okay. The other issue is that most of the forests in the Northeast are owned by communities, and it's not visible properly, huh? So when I say that basically it is under, so the blue is basically saying under USF. Now USF is a category called unclassed state forest, which in many of the regions, especially Nagaland, Meghalaya, Mizoram and Manipur, is all community-owned forest. And in most of these areas, they have actually rights over the land. In places like Arunachal, although there is a high percentage under USF, it's actually de facto rights. It's not really yet given. And then there are states like Sikkim which do not have areas so much under communities, but more areas. And so the other red one is under protected areas, right? So So a lot of people might think that this is a challenge because many people believe that state-controlled protection and enforcement is the main hope for biodiversity. However, I believe that it should be seen as an opportunity too for decentralized local governance. And the other thing that I did with the forest cover data was to just look at the relationship between forests and people. So on the x-axis is people per square kilometers, and on the y-axis is person forest cover. And there is a trend of a negative relationship. So if you see states like Arunachal, which have very low human population densities, have a relatively high cover. And this is, of course, with the overall forest cover, not with the, further categorizations. But if I look at only dense forest, then the relationship and pattern somewhat changes, with most states having very limited amount of dense forest left, barring Arunachal. But what is important to note is that in this report, the same report which talks about 66% of forest cover in Northeast India, also documents about 550 square kilometers of forest was lost between 2009 and 11. And you can see that some states like Manipur and Nagaland are reported to have lost large areas of forest, whereas surprisingly some states like Assam and Sikkim and Tripura have almost no change. And this is kind of surprising for someone like me who's worked there for 15 years, and we know in that region that large areas have been lost in the last 15 years. And so I took a closer look at some of these trends in forest cover change from the last decade by looking at the data that is available with FSI from 2001. And, it is very hard. And what I saw was very, very surprising, and not really so surprising given that it's FSI. But, it is amazing to see that, I don't know if you can understand because the axis, the thing is not shown properly. This is showing the net gains and net losses over a 10-year period. And what this suggests that if you compare the past data, basically what we're going to be saying is that forest cover has increased by about 1852 square kilometers if we take this data at face value. And it is kind of, there's these wild fluctuations where you have years of large decreases and sudden increases. And how is that possible? And states like Assam are supposed to have had a very low rate of forest loss. And this does not tally with the on-ground observations or studies by other independent organizations. So way back in 2001, one other study by NRSA estimated that forest cover in Northeast India was 42% of the geographical area. In the same year, FSI estimated it was 64%. Similarly, in Meghalaya, way back in the 1980s and 95, it was supposed to be between 14,000 to 15,000 square kilometers of forest, whereas the most recent estimate in 2011 is 17,000. So, there is a huge discrepancy in the way this data, it is impossible to believe that all of these areas, forest cover is actually increased, And I come to an area where I have worked extensively in the last 15 years, and this is an area close to the Assam-Arunachal border in Shonitpur district. In 1995, when I began work there, there was a lot of encroachment and settlement there by the Bodo community. And I was witness to the loss and destruction of a large area of forest there. And this is also well documented in other studies, which have shown that up to 300 square kilometers of forest has gone in that district alone. And this is what the area looks like now. Even more, actually there's villages and plantations and all kinds of things. And even the Assam Forest Department has recorded that more than 3,000 square kilometers of RS are encroached in Assam, out of which 2,500 is around various interstate boundaries, and 88 of these RS are encroached. So, this is not somehow reflected in the FSI assessments. So, my question is this change or net loss gain that we are seeing over a decade, is it based on real differences, or is it based on varied and multiple sources of error, resulting in a completely misleading picture? And this kind of precludes any attempt at comparisons, So, while I understand that it's extremely difficult maybe at a countrywide scale, and the FSI is to be commended for their efforts, I think there are many criticisms with the methodology and the interpretation, and it becomes, also what is the definition of the forest? Here, anything which is greater than 10% is considered tree canopy cover. And they themselves say in the report that they do not distinguish between natural or man-made forest. Natural or man-made habitats, which is green cover, basically plantations, coconut plantations, palm, fruit orchards, bamboo forest, all of it is forest cover, according to this assessment. So it's actually green cover. It is not, all shades of green are not the same. So it's not really forest, The other thing is that, and many scientists would wonder, so this is how dense tropical forest would look like, actually, if there was more brown fruiting and if, people were, but this is how a bamboo forest and open forest looks. And to many laymen, it may not seem very different, but biologically, it is completely different in terms of the value of that forest for biodiversity and wildlife. So, many scientists might wonder, why am I, even using this data to try and compare? But I think we need to remember that these are supposed to be the baselines which drive many of our policy decisions. And, we cite and report these numbers and figures from FSI reports when it's grossly overestimated. There are many unverifiable sources of error. And, so comparisons of change become meaningless. So we don't know really what is the actual forest cover in the northeastern region. And that's the most basic data that we need. And we also need to be able to compare what's been the change. And the other important point, although I don't have much time, I think it's very important to say it, is that, there's a thing called the recorded forest area, which is basically forest which is recorded legally with the forest department, which is reserve forest, protected forest, and PAs, that is protected areas. And that always remains static. If you look at 1987 because that is always remained as static, because those areas are legally recorded as forest area. That is different from what FSI reports as the actual forest cover, which can be much greater than, obviously, that recorded forest area. Now, my point is that even within these recorded forest areas, there have been changes, like I've shown you, in Assam and most other states, RFs. And 20% of Assam's RFs are encroached. But we have FSI, there is no assessment of what is the change within those recorded forest area. So we really don't know what is the change happening within the recorded forest area. And one of my colleagues told me yesterday that actually FSI was doing it for a few years in the past. And with the sample data that they had, they themselves said that there was a loss of about 9,000 square kilometers in recorded forest areas in the country. If you look at recorded forest area. So, I think that this is very important and it needs to be looked at in more detail. So, however, my talk is not about the problem with forest cover assessment, but I wish use this to mainly highlight two other aspects and how this data is interpreted and used often in these documents. So, in the years when there is unprecedented loss of forest, in the Northeast especially, any change is always blamed on shifting cultivation. Yet, in the years when there is a gain, it is always said that, it's because of regeneration of shifting cultivation. And, some of the other reasons put forth are insurgency, encroachment, and biotic pressure, but mainly shifting cultivation. And there is never any mention of other drivers of deforestation, such as agricultural expansion or timber felling, illegal and legal, as well as roads, mining, and hydropower dams. And I argue that the loss of forest cover and associated impacts are equally, if not more, due to several other aspects associated with development, and this is related to the creation of big dams, mining, and expansion and promotion of cash crops and settled agriculture. So I think we're missing the big picture. And, hunting and shifting cultivation are often cited as the most important and severe threats to wildlife and forests in the region. I do not wish to undervalue the importance of these factors, and in fact, I have studied them quite a bit in the past myself. However, I think it's a very complex issue, and I think we need a more nuanced understanding. And I think also we need to consider more critically the more damaging emerging threats from larger development processes in the region. So one thing I wish to dwell on shifting cultivation a bit. the NEC website, I forgot to put, the Northeastern Council, for instance, blames shifting cultivation as a very, very destructive practice. And they say to overcome, there are pilot projects to settle, shifting cultivators. This kind of belief is what has driven government policy in some states in the Northeast. And, but you have over 100 tribes and more than, the estimates are kind of over the years, how correct they are or how current they are, I don't know, but about over 6 lakh families dependent on shifting cultivation. And, it has been criticized on many grounds that it causes erosion of topsoil, it's primitive, it's uneconomic and all that. And it's inefficient, it leads to destruction of biodiversity. But many other studies have questioned this and have shown that shifting cultivation is an ingenious form of organic cultivation. It involves multi-cropping and it's very well suited to the hilly terrain and the high rainfall areas in Northeast. And indeed in other parts of the world where it's practiced. And the economic and energy efficiency of jhum is much higher than many other forms of agriculture. Also, the other point is that cultivation is rarely carried out for more than a year, right? After that, people move on. And that regenerating fallow, it allows the nutrients to come back. The burning also results in creation of ash, which leads to nutrients in the soil. This whole question of erosion of topsoil due to shifting cultivation is also being disproved by some studies which have shown that actually, because of rapid regeneration of weeds and bamboo as well as retention of rootstock in the fallows, and because it's interspersed in a larger mosaic of, fields and forests and with small patches of cultivated areas, this retains much more topsoil than other forms of settled agriculture like terrace cultivation also. And so the other myth, not really myth, maybe it's true in some places, is that jhum was okay as long as population pressure was low and the cycles were long. But more recent evidence questions this assumption in all areas because it says that the reason why jhum cycles are shorter in many places or it's 5 to 10 years in many places is because for many communities it is not determined by the population but by the amount of time and labor it takes to clear new patches, So clearing new areas or clearing very old regenerating fallows is more laborious and time consuming. So people decide when to cultivate or go back to a particular area depending on the fertility levels of the soil and how time consuming it is. So, there are, for instance, one of my students, Karthik, he works in Upper Siam with the Adi people, and he is looking at various aspects of jhum cultivation. And he's found, by talking to the Adis, that over there, for instance, government policies have encouraged, in some places, settled agriculture. Of course, it's impossible in most areas because of the lack of flat land, but in some areas where there is valley for flat land, people do say that yes, rice cultivation is great, it's productive, more productive, settled thing, but they list many, many advantages of jhum. And many of these are multi-cropping, they grow millet, maize, they grow many varieties of rice, they grow over 30 vegetables. They also, it's less expensive, it requires less inputs. Organic, it's an organic system, whereas settled cultivation requires pesticides and fertilizers. Then it's also intricately linked to the festivals and culture of people there. And the land tenure system, it's a communal system, the way people decide where to cultivate in a particular area, whereas terrace cultivation and settled cultivation encourages individual ownership of land, which is a problem in these areas. So, the question is, what is the extent of deforestation and loss of forest cover that can be attributed to jhum? And unfortunately, we really don't have very good estimates, as you can see, because it's all varies from year to year, and it varies from state to state without proper ground truthing and satellite imagery, with the ground truthing with the satellite imagery. And because in a area which is cultivated, there's different successional stages. So you need to be able to distinguish the signatures of different forest types to be actually able to say how much of the dense forest is affected by jhum cultivation. Of course, jhum has negative effects on biodiversity. And these are the images, of course, that sort of tell people that, oh, it's really bad because there's burning and there's clearing. But it is temporary and it is in small patches, you know. It is not a complete transformation of the landscape. Okay, I won't go forward. Now, Jhum, of course, does have some negative effects on biodiversity because it does not support many specialized or endangered species of birds and mammals, regenerating fallows, especially young fallows or bamboo forests, as compared to a mature tropical forest. But my question is, given that, you know, it's not possible to create or set aside large areas of mature forests for wildlife, and given that much land in Northeast is community-owned, what is a better land use for biodiversity conservation? Is it the continuation of Jhum practices with some modern improvements that enhances soil fertility and helps the recovery of vegetation, which allows the maintenance of cycles without resulting in new clearings? But is it conversion of these same areas for monoculture, cash crops and plantations? And I'm sorry, but I think that it's common sense to realize that a monoculture rubber plantation or a coffee plantation or a tea estate has much less value for biodiversity than areas which are secondary forests or regenerating fallows of Jhum. And you completely transform the landscape. The other thing is that it's very culturally important, and even though the government policies have encouraged shifting away from the practice of Jhuming, it requires people to then become dependent on government schemes and subsidies and all kinds of things, and there is often very poor access to the market and technical know-how and the capital to do that properly. So one of my colleagues who's worked on the impacts of shifting cultivation on wildlife, he says, T.R. Shankaraman, he says, a balanced approach to development that also recognizes the merits of Jhum is needed. Then this remarkable form of organic farming may persist into the 21st century. So, for instance, government policies in most northeastern states are now encouraging cash crop plantations. In Arunachal, there's ambitious plans to have 25,000 hectares for rubber. There's a lot of plans for increasing the area under rubber in most states. So, of course, one of the reasons for doing this is to encourage better economic development, which is fine. But, however, it is very misleading to promote this as a more benign land use for biodiversity. That's my contention. So the conversion of a dynamic forested landscape that is interspersed with regenerating fallows, secondary and primary forests to one that results in a drastic transformation to a uniform landscape with monoculture plantations or settled agriculture or terrace cultivation requiring external inputs will have much greater consequences for biodiversity. So, and given that these are being promoted as an alternative to Jhum, and given the finite areas of land, it is unclear how there will be a net gain for biodiversity by discouraging Jhum, unless you're setting aside those areas for recovery and regeneration. This is unlikely to happen if agriculture and plantations and other forms of land use are intensified in these same areas, of land. So, so I think, So the other driver of deforestation is, the interplay between insurgency and the demand for land rights and, encroachment, which is starkly evident in Western Assam. This is a Bodo Students' Union sign which says no land, no right, no vote. No right to education, no vote. No implementation of Forest Rights Act, no vote. So it's an area where there has been a lot of extortion and killing and violence. And like I showed you in previous slides, it has also resulted in the loss of a lot of forest cover. And this has affects the daily life and functioning of common people. It also affects management and protection activities in neighboring states of Arunachal Pradesh, which has the Pake Tiger Reserve close to this area. There were many other reserve forests. This area was an extremely important lowland foothill forest habitat for elephants, tigers, and birds that I work on, hornbills. And I have seen the, area completely disappear in terms of, and this is the case probably in many other parts of Northeast, but, it is less spoken of in the conservation science discourse. We don't really discuss how insurgency has affected biodiversity conservation. Now I'm coming to a larger issue of development. basically, we kind of tend to overlook the elephant in the room. We don't talk so much, at least I'm talking about scientists and conservationists, we don't seem to have talked so much about the loss of forest cover due to mega dams and mining. And as many of you may have noted that, at an all-India level, about 6,000 square kilometers of forest was given clearance for different development projects, of which 2,500 square kilometers was for mining, and rejections were for less than 140 square kilometers. And, in the northeastern states, except for Tripura, no projects were rejected. And this is data from 2004 to 2013. And what was rejected in Tripura was things like a school or a godown or something like that. And out of this total area of 1,600 is for projects in the northeast, of which Arunachal has the lion's share with 1,455, and 990 square kilometers is for oil exploration and mining. So this is huge, and of course I don't know why states like, so this is the breakup of, the kind of, I don't know, you can't see it properly, mining, oil and gas exploration, hydropower, roads, defense, transmission lines and others. Now, I don't know if the data is complete, but basically other states seem to have, there were fewer projects in other states. Which were, it's not that they were not there, but there seem to have been, whatever was there mostly was cleared, but they seem to have had fewer projects. Now, I don't know whether, it's kind of surprising to me that the states which have more government-controlled forests are the ones which are giving away more forests for development. I don't know if that is true, or whether it is that states where there is more violence or insurgency are the states which don't have many planned projects. But basically, so the issue of dams in the northeast. About 168 dams are supposed to be proposed in the northeast. Some of them are under construction, some of them are in different stages of clearance. 168 is just a number which is in the past. Actually, it's probably increased now already. Arunachal till 2010, 132 were proposed with an installed capacity of 40,000 megawatts. Now I'm told it's increased to over 150 dams and 43,000 megawatt installed capacity. Now if you look at the current installed capacity in Arunachal, it's 35 megawatts. And all India current capacity. So we're clearly talking about huge changes here. If you look at the a map showing the kind of dams planned for Arunachal, this is an old one. It's also huge. All major river systems are covered in projects and dams. And now, what's the problem with all this? Basically there are huge upstream and downstream impacts of dams. There are huge ecological and social costs of dams. And, the rate of clearance is very high. There's also a the clearance process is based on very poor quality environmental impact assessments. And there's often very strange arguments used for a place like Arunachal, where one of the arguments is that very few people are getting displaced. For instance, in Lohit district, it's said that only 3,500 Idu-Mishmi will be displaced. But the point is that the entire population of the Mishmi population there. And that is, Dibang Valley has the lowest population density in the district, one person per square kilometer. But you have 17 dams proposed in that valley, and it's somehow that the numbers is what matters. The social impact is considered to be little, even if the entire population is affected or displaced. Then there are issues of migrant labor that comes into these areas because of dam construction. And often if you see the numbers of migrant labor, they outnumber the local population, more than double sometimes. And that has huge social and ecological impacts in that area. Also, there are questions of, the project proponents are supposed to pay compensatory afforestation funds to the forest department. And it is said that double the area that is being lost because of the dam will be afforested. Now, there's lots of issues and problems with this. on the ground, whether it actually happens and how well that afforestation is, whether it's of quality, whether it's useful or needed. But the point is that in Arunachal, in some areas, this afforestation is also done in some of the areas which are cleared are USF areas, which are under community ownership. So by choosing, then those areas are obviously taken over by the forest department for compensatory afforestation. So it's not just the directly affected people. There are multiple small other impacts that a larger group faces. Then the other issue is that it creates divisions among people, within communities and between people. Because I don't know if you guys follow in the media, this is reported quite a bit, but in Siang, for instance, people have very vigorously opposed the dam, and no public hearings have been allowed. Public hearings are mandatory for all these projects. But in a place like Dibang Valley, for about 5 years, people opposed and cancelled public hearings. They didn't let it happen. But then they were worn down because the project proponents and government managed to, sort of increase the compensation. And they also increased the number of people who would get compensation, the percentage of project-affected people, which resulted in a critical mass of people now supporting the project. So it creates divisions, because in the larger valley, many people are opposed to it, but then they are, because of this, then of course there's a lot of downstream impacts. I just want to say one thing. Okay, the Lower Demwe project has been cleared. So in the Lohit, a single river system, you have 13 projects, of which 7 are on the main river, with an installed capacity of 7,500 megawatts. And these 7 projects are in a length of 112 kilometers. So if these dams do come up, only 10 kilometers of that river will now flow free. So this also causes huge problems in the daily the water flows, and in the sedimentation and the hydrology of these rivers. And in Subansiri, similarly, 8 of the 19 projects are on the main river. It will fragment about 375 kilometers of the entire length of the river, so 212 kilometers will be cut off, like this. Over 5,000 hectares of forest would be cleared. And in fact, Subansiri, the main dam of 2,000 megawatt, is already under construction, although again that is being opposed by dam-opposed downstream people in Assam, because it has consequences for them. So the other thing is, of course, that when we look at the impacts or projects that have affected people till now, India, we don't consider the downstream impacts so much, nor do we consider the cumulative impacts of dams. So, for instance, people in the downstream areas in Assam are not considered officially acknowledged as being affected, although they are going to be hugely affected. There's also severe effects on wildlife in going to be severe effects on wildlife in certain places like Dibru-Saikwa Wildlife Sanctuary and Kaziranga. It's going to affect the floodplain ecology in these areas. And as it is in many of these areas, it's flood prone. Then also there's issues of dam safety and other risks in very geologically and seismically active region. Then there's going to be sudden massive water releases. This is amazing because it's going to fluctuate between 2 to 600% of normal flows. For example, when the water is stored in the reservoir, the flow will be about 6 cubic meters per second in 20 hours. Then, suddenly when it's released, the flow will be 2,560 cubic meters in 4 hours. Can you imagine the kind of fluctuations of daily, water flows in these rivers and how it will affect many things? And a recent study has also shown, kind of analyzed this whole thing and said that India would have the highest dam densities in the world of 0.3247 dams per 1,000 square kilometers, 62 times higher than global figures. And 1 dam per 32 kilometers of river channel, which is higher than in the US or other places. And 88% of these dams are in species-rich ecosystems, and they have projected that 22 species of plants and 8 species of vertebrates would be. Now, the thing is that these proposed constructions have not been, and the negative consequences have not been much talked about by conservationists, scientists. And we don't seem to, we complain that EIAs are done in a dubious way, but we are mostly unwilling to participate or engage in these processes of making it better. And, somehow it's always easier to document the threats due to hunting and shifting cultivation and point out local communities for the destruction of wildlife and forests than maybe trying to address these larger issues and take on all these projects. And, I myself am also guilty of that because I've woken up to these issues only more recently. And, I think there's also a fear among scientists that they would be seen as anti-development and going too much into activist mode if they start talking about this too much. But I make a very different argument here. I'm not saying that some of these development things are not needed. Indeed, some are required for creating economic opportunities and income for people. But, let conservationists, scientists and policymakers not gloss over the impact of these in transforming natural landscapes. They are much more irreversible than low-impact subsistence land uses by forest-dependent people. I mean, let us be clear that impact on wildlife and forest of a series of 7 dams on the Lohit River of a 7,500 megawatt dam with a loss of over 2,000 hectares of forest and the influx of 7,000-8,000 migrant labor that are resident for close to 7-8 years on the ecology of a place is much, much greater than the subsistence cultivation practices of 3,500 Idu-Mishmi people, So, there is no comparison. And this is just one river basin. The same applies to all river systems in Arunachal, Siang, Dibang, Kameng, many others. So we also insist on this whole policy of relocation for safeguarding tiger populations and creating inviolate spaces based on the idea that human residence in a reserve is always bad for tigers. Yes, we do not protest as loudly when large areas are being routinely given away for development projects and dams. We want buffer zones where people and tigers are supposed to coexist, where land use is to be made compatible with tiger conservation, yet pockets of these lands are given away to make way for dams and mines. And, for me, something just does not seem right because it's all contradictory and in opposition to each other. The other issue is of biodiversity. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. Oh, you go on too long. I'll go over it faster. So, Northeast is known as also an area of India's biological frontier with the so-called discovery of lots of previously undescribed species by biologists. And this is a cause for celebration. Yet, paradoxically, it is also an area where hunting of wildlife is pervasive. Okay. Now, I don't have much time, but what I wanted to say is that, we have to recognize that there are many different reasons that people hunt in the Northeast. And, this whole, while wildlife laws apply here, we cannot expect it to change overnight. There are a lot of issues here that, I don't know how to do this very fast, but yeah. So, law enforcement and, so when in a society where law, it's not in consonance with local customs and traditions, in the sense that it will take time for people to change. And we cannot just address how to stop hunting unless we know why people hunt, and that there are many different reasons why people hunt. Okay, so, the point I'm trying to make is that hunting can and should be reduced, and I have spent the better part of my work in trying to do that, but, the thing is that okay. What I'm really, because of the time, I'm a bit worried. Okay. So,
I think you take 5-10 minutes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I'm saying that there will be a time lag between when people will change, An example is that, we know about piracy laws for music and software, but we all go against the law anyway. What I'm saying is that when it's not something that people in the general society think is, when the people think it's acceptable, then we can't expect it to change. And by, imposing our moral values on hunting and just making these judgments about communities who are hunting without really understanding, it cuts off the dialogue. I feel that local, once you engage with people, and then you can probably make a difference, or you can find alternatives to hunting. For instance, during my work, I have worked with many people who once they've undergone a change of heart, their identity is not just that of hunters. They become the biggest advocates for wildlife. And therefore, it is, important to understand that they also have a story to tell and their motivations and reasons and eventually why they stopped hunting. So bringing about a change and reduction can only be successful through more local initiatives and not just based on wildlife laws and enforcement, government enforcement. I had a lot more to say about this, but I think I'll skip it. The other issue is that, we always tend to focus on PAs and protected areas as the, best places for wildlife, and indeed they are. They are the strongholds for wildlife. But then many studies have shown that many species, are doing well outside of PAs. So we need to recognize the value of areas outside protected areas, especially in the Northeast, given that much larger land areas are on outside PAs. And, for leaving aside this controversial idea of coexistence, we need to understand what levels of biodiversity can survive in such areas with some form of human use that does not transform the landscape totally, So we have an initiative which is a very small-scale local initiative where hornbills, I work with hornbills a lot, and they are large mobile birds. They don't know the boundaries, right? And as I showed you earlier, a lot of the reserve forest in Assam was lost. I saw the cutting down of many hornbill nest trees, and we started this initiative to protect nests outside the park, which is the Pake Tiger Reserve, with the local people there. And these people many of them were hunters in the past, but now they help to find and monitor hornbill nests. And this program is sustained through citizen participation also. Urban Indian citizens provide funding and support to sustain this work. And of course, this is a very small-scale initiative, and it's only restricted to a few villages and areas. But there are many such localized efforts happening now in many states in Northeast India, and I think that will only be a good thing. So, The other issue that I wanted to talk about is that while we often try to wean away people from the forest and, take them away, but in the process we also cut off the relationships and connections that people have with nature. And in my 17 years of working there, I found that individual old hunters, middle-aged hunters have much more knowledge and interest in the forest than the youth, who are becoming more like us, glued to mobile phones or playing video games and playing snooker and whatever. I mean, that's their choice. But, shanty towns are coming up. There is an increasing rural and urban divide in Northeast. And there's also growth of non-tribal population. So that's resulting in a lot of changes there. And, when I first went to Itanagar, which is the capital of Arunachal in 95, I was struck by that was in 95, there were hardly not so many cars. But now I'm struck by the massive increases in the number of cars and the fact that Itanagar has traffic jams. And, it's kind of in keeping with the changing times that people there have been enterprising and have now got car washes. There's a car wash every 1 kilometer. It must be the city with the highest density of car washes, more than New York City or places like that. I guess that kind of change is inevitable, but I just hope that people keep their connections with nature. So, one of my childhood inspirations was David Attenborough, and my son's biggest hero now. He says that people, if they lose their knowledge and sympathy and understanding, they're going to mistreat it and not ask politicians to care for it. So I'm just wondering that whether people should not become more urbanized. Is that the way we want conservation to happen, by only talking about exclusive areas for conservation? I wanted to end on a somewhat different note, and I'm sorry I've taken so long, that one of the, this one-dimensional perception of the Northeast as one of conflict is changing. One of the things that the Northeast is known for is music, and that unites people and gives them a voice. I recently attended the Zero Festival of Music set in the beautiful Zero Valley, and where rock bands and musicians from all over came. And, the organizers had even invited conservationists to come and talk there about wildlife conservation, although people were more interested in the rock music. But, Ruben Mashavanga, a well-known Manipuri musician, he said, if you're talking into a microphone, people will not listen. If you say it through music, then people will listen. Unfortunately, I could not say it with music, but I hope that you listened a little bit. And I'm sorry that I, spent too much time on certain and I could not, focus on some of the things that I wanted to. Thank you for listening. And I would like to thank several people, my colleagues, for numerous ideas and discussions over the years, and Mahesh also for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to speak. Sorry.